The heat came up off the stones of the Red Keep like breath from a great beast, baked and old and sour with the summer stink of the city. From the terrace outside the throne room's high doors, the whole of King's Landing shimmered and shifted. Roofs like hoarded coins, alleys like veins, the black ribbon of the rush sliding away to the glitter of the bay. In the northwestern sky, a gull hung on a gust like a scrap of torn parchment, and the sound of it, a thin, querulous cry, fell through the bright air and died against the high red walls. Robert Baratheon had always liked high places. The world laid itself out beneath him like a board, all the pieces waiting for the flick of his hand. In youth he had loved cliffs and crags, watchtowers and battlements. He loved the way a wind could scour a man clean. Yet the wind today was only heat, the air heavy with the odors of fish and tanneries, dung and wine, and beneath it all the faint iron reek of the city's forges. His boar spear thudded against the stone as he shifted weight from one sore knee to the other. The banners above the doors were lazy, gold thread catching and releasing the sun. The crowned stag above black, the Lannister lions red too near. He did not look at that second banner long. A king had to bear the heraldry he'd married, as well as the one he'd been born to. The doors opened behind him with the stately breath of old hinges. Footmen in green and gold bowed so low their foreheads nearly grazed their knees. "Your Grace," said Sir Robar Royce from the Kingsguard, fair hair damp at the temples, white cloak hanging straight despite the heat. "They are assembled." "Let them simmer," Robert said, not loudly and not softly, and turned. He found himself briefly in his own reflection in the jet-black stone of the doors, a figure more beryl than man, beard showing streaks of iron, eyes set deep like a miner who had gone too long without daylight. He could almost hear Ned's dry little cough at the sight of him. "Seven hells, Robert, will nothing curb you." But Ned was far to the north, under a sky that smelled of snow and pine, not boiled cabbage. He had sent no summons to Winterfell this time. It had been a long road, and the last time Ned had ridden south, all the roads to ruin had sprung up under his horse's hooves like weeds. Robert laughed under his breath, a sound that held neither mirth nor bitterness, but some cracked alloy of both, and shoved the doors wide with his own hands. The throne room opened cool and dim compared to the bright terrace, a relief to the eyes. The Iron Throne crouched at the far end like some barbed sea creature dragged up from a black depth, its broken swords catching light in hard blades. At its foot, crimson carpets went soft with use, furred along the edges with dust. Beneath the high windows, courtiers stirred like fish in a shallow pool. A breathy murmur went through them. Cloth whispered. Rings clicked. A cough was swallowed. Cersei was at the foot of the steps, her gown a fall of summer gold, her hair a brighter gold still. She wore no crown. She did not need one to make the room revolve about her. Her face, so perfectly composed that to think of its muscles moving seemed a little rude, tilted like a mask on a hinge as she glanced from Robert to the two men who waited at the center of the hall beneath the throne. He had not seen either of them together in years. Stannis stood stiff with the choleric tension of a drawn bow, a man who had learned young that if he unbent for comfort, the world would snap him for sport. A leather folio was tucked beneath one arm as if it were a shield. The middle Baratheon brother's hair had marched back from his brow like a chastened army, leaving a forehead the color of old parchment. He had shaved too close, and a nick along his jaw made a small question mark of dried blood. Beside him, Renly seemed made of light and ease. He had grown into his jaw. The boy had become a man in the years since Robert had last bothered to look properly. His velvet doublet was the green of storm-wet leaves, and cut to flatter what the gods had given him. A stag brooch pinned his collar, antlers climbing in gold up his throat. Between them, there was something like a mirror turned sideways in time. Stannis was the north wind through a crack in the shutters, Renly the southern breeze in a sail. Robert loved them both, and trusted neither as he trusted a hammer or a wine cup. A tool was honest. A man's heart was a forge you could not see into. He took the steps to the dais without grace, and did not pretend otherwise. Guards thumped hilts, the sound rolling around the tall chamber like a slow drum. Robert did not sit. He turned and faced the gathered court. "You've all heard 100 rumors," he said. "Given we're in King's Landing, most of them were probably whispered into ears by one man, and most of you paid for the privilege." Ain't ripple of laughter. Littlefinger's mouth crooked in that neat, ambiguous way of his. He stood with his hands folded sweetly, sleeves of dove-gray silk, a pin at his throat, in the shape of a mockingbird that winked with a blue stone eye. Varys floated somewhere to the left, round and soft, the silk of his violet sleeves making small sighs when he moved. Pycelle stood near with his chain of office glinting and his smile oozing. Robert let the chuckles die on their own. Jon Arryn is dead. He did not embellish it with grief. Jon's death was a stone lodged in his throat, and it would not do to choke here. He served me well for many years. He brought us through famine and peace and all the tedium between. But the realm changes. It's time to set it in order again. His gaze slid to his brothers and stayed. Stannis of House Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone. He made himself see not the lisps of old resentments. Storm's End, the siege, the onions that had saved the garrison, the way the stew of that time had flavored every word between them since. But the man. The folio under the arm, the frown that could cleave a board. "Come here." Stannis obeyed, as he always obeyed, and for all his stiffness, his steps made no noise. "You can count," Robert said, as if to a soldier to whom he'd toss a pike. "You can read, and you don't drink. You will be master of coin." A murmur. Swelling. He felt the court prick itself against the news like a field of hedgehogs. He could feel Littlefinger smiling without looking at him. He turned his head anyway. Petyr Balish's smile had grown less ambiguous. Sweet, sweet, and small enough to hide in a palm. "That office is filled, Your Grace," Littlefinger said. He never said the words most men said before a king. Never by your leave, never, if it please. He walked between courtiers the way a cat walked between chair legs, negligent, faintly amused by the idea that anything might stand in his path. "It was," Robert said. "Now it isn't. Unless you would like to remind me where the key to the Royal Mint is kept. It is a key, is it not? I imagine the lock has rusted around it by now." "Da." Laughter again, a sharp little tap of it. Littlefinger bowed. He threw the bow away so lightly, it became its own kind of insolence. "My condolences to the key, Your Grace. I shall of course relinquish my predecessors. Figures at once." "Your predecessor?" Robert said. "You've no predecessors anymore, only successors." A breath. He saw the lioness's head turn, as if she'd scented blood, saw Varys' eyes go soft with interest. Stannis' mouth went thinner yet, which was a trick Robert would have liked to learn in a glass. He reached for Renly with his eyes. The youngest brother was already stepping forward, knees bending just so, the proper meld of grace and youth and confidence. "Renly," Robert said, and for a heartbeat they were boys again. A winter day at Storm's End, when Renly had been small enough to ride Robert's shoulders, and Stannis had frowned at them, as if he had read somewhere that joy was a misdemeanor. "You are the king's hand." If the hedgehogs had pricked at Stannis, they spilled their quills now. The murmur rose, flooded the pillars, and washed back. The sound of rings clicking became a patter like rain. Cersei did not move. He looked hard at her as if he might force a wince out of marble. At last her lips moved, the bow of them crisp. "A bold choice, husband," she said. She had never managed the word Your Grace for him without turning it into an insult. He wasn't sure she heard the sound others did when they spoke it. "Your brother is very young." "Jon was old," Robert said. "We have tried old. Let us see if new does better." He lifted his hand before any of the lesser fish could begin to flap their fins at him. "Kneel." Renly went to one knee in front of the throne. In the torchlight his hair showed glints of bronze and pale gold. He looked up, and Robert saw Garland in him, and Steffan, and once, faintly, a flash that was Rhaegar from the side, some angle of bone or manner, and his chest, filled with some old pressure that could have been grief or an oncoming storm. "Serve." Robert said simply, and set his hand on Renly's head. He had never been much for speeches. He took Renly up and kissed him on the brow, and the chamber breathed again. Pycelle's voice came then, oiled and slow. Each word a bead rolled in fat fingers. A most fortuitous day for the realm, your grace. The gods can wait, Robert said. We have work. He set his feet and raised his voice so that even the guards at the door and the last girl beneath the last column could hear him. Littlefinger, return every ledger, key, tally stick, chisel and coin that belongs to the crown. If you cannot find them, I expect you to bring me a map of where you looked. Varys, if any of those items tries to walk away, follow their legs. Pycelle, if the legs are sickly, offer them leeches. Dismissed. Nay. The courtiers bowed, some with real haste, as if in fear they might be appointed to something against their will. The room became a rustling field cut by the straight line of Stannis going toward the side door that led to the old counting rooms. Renly stayed. He stood very still, and for all his youth he suddenly seemed large as the throne behind him. You've set a fire, Cersei said later, when most of the room had emptied, and the floaters of silk and perfume had gone after their dinners. They stood upon the dais where the flensed swords climbed, like thorns growing out of iron. Ser Boros and Ser Meryn waited below them, white-cloaked and heavy. Jaime leaned against a pillar and watched the room as if it were a field he'd already crossed and found wanting. "Air," Robert said, and took wine from a boy. "Ay, it was cold in here. Your master of coin will snuff it," she said. "The realm will go dark with his thrift. Dragon's eyes work well in darkness, I've heard." "Menso, you'll be amazed what we can see," Robert said, and drained half the cup. "You've had your darlings on that council for 15 years. Now I'll have mine." "Your darling," Cersei murmured. "We'll get someone killed." He shrugged. "When did you think we were living, if not amongst dead men's ghosts? Let Renly earn what the gods gave him and Stannis count the coppers. I have hunting to do." He tried to make it light, a flippancy he could toss at her like a bone to a dog. But she was no dog, and he had never been light. When she left, he went to the terrace again, if only for the relief of air that moved. Somewhere deep in the keep hammers rang. Down on the mud gate wharfmen shouted. A bell from the great sept sent out its measured sorrow. Robert braced his hands on the stone rail and watched the gulls wheel. There were stories about a king who had turned his face from the sea. They were always followed by stories of drowned kings. The counting rooms had been unused too long. Stannis put his hand on the rim of the big iron-bound table in the middle chamber and felt the faint grit of dust that settled even where servants came and went. He disliked dust as he disliked imprecision. Dust was the fine body of time. He did not look at Littlefinger's chair, but he knew where it had been. The way a man knows where in a room a dog habitually lies in sun. "Bring me everything," he said. The words to the clerks came short. He had no desire to frighten them, only to move them. But often in his life, the two had been the same. He stripped off his cloak and rolled his sleeves. The folio he had carried he set open at the corner of the table. A list, drawn in his own traffic-thin hand. Debts due the crown. Debts owed by the crown. Revenue from port taxes, from minting, from leases to the guilds. Customs on wines, oils, spice, dyes, tin, lead, wool. The crown's holdings in and about the city. Holdings out in the crown lands. Holdings further. A ledger of loans from the faith. A second ledger of loans from the Iron Bank. A list of payments to the city watch, the King's Guard, the royal household. Disbursements made and promised. Dragons. Both the coins that no longer existed and the ones that did in the hands of men with private mints. They brought him Littlefinger's papers. Fastidious, Stannis would grant him that. The man had kept dependably charming records. Margins like smiles, flourishes that drew the eye away from the plain body of figures, so that the brain grew pleased and dull. The king's hand, his own brother, a boy he had last seen running along the storm wall, more amused by the rain than troubled by it, arrived not long after, and stood with his hands braced back on the table's edge, reading upside down. You look like a scribe, Renly said. The hand's chain hung heavier on him than it would on a thicker neck. I look like a man at work, Stannis said. He turned a page. Go and play with your pretty friends. Loras is not a toy, Renly said, mild as milk. The slight crease between his brows did not mar his looks. Renly had been made like a painting, each error a brushstroke that only improved the whole. What do you think you will find that Jon Arryn couldn't? Jon did not hold this office, Stannis said. He turned another page and jabbed his finger at a line of figures that had made some clerk proud of his neatness. And I will not be comparing armor to eyes. You never played Savas with us as boys because you thought games a waste, Renly said. Now you play against a board you cannot see. At least smile when you get beaten, Stannis. Stannis did not smile. He could not recall the last time he had smiled without effort, or if he had ever done it. When I am beaten, he said, I try to learn how to make it not happen again. Renly let the silence grow, then moved around the table and leaned over the papers properly. His chain made a faint chink on the wood. Stannis glanced. The links were different than Jon's. Less ostentatious, more clenched, bars and keys, and hammers repeating. Renly's smell was good soap, and some faint herbal tincture, and the leather of a new glove. He ran his finger along the neat columns like a boy learning his letters. How many people in this city, do you think, Renly said, have ever looked at a number and seen the thing it truly names? That is half my point, Stannis said. And you will never get them to if they think it will cost them theirs. He flicked his finger at a second page. Here. Wages for the city watch. A reasonable increase 6 years ago. Food dear, unrest in the Riverlands, the riots with the Cobblers' Guild. But then what? A second increase the following year, masked by a seeming decrease. Only the coin was paid from the mint's account for that quarter rather than the watch. A double payment on a different line of march that does not arrive at the end of the column at all. Curious. Then? Renly's lips pursed. Robert would have called the expression a kiss aimed at air. Littlefinger always said the city watch's temper was best purchased in advance. If he paid them twice, he thought he was buying 3 times the obedience. He was buying something else, Stannis said. We owe 800,000 to Casterly Rock, 400,000 to the Faith, and more to Bravos, Renly said. He looked up, and his eyes were bright. Not the brightness of mirth. There was a quick cleverness in him that often hid under charm. Do you mean to use this, brother? I mean to stop it, Stannis said. I mean to wring from every pipe what it should deliver, and close every pipe I find delivering elsewhere. Renly tilted his head, regarding him with that slightly baffled gratitude he sometimes gave Stannis, as if he had been given a cold room in summer. You mean, Renly said, to cut all the ribbons and make Cersei furious? Stannis looked back down at the pages. Cersei is furious when she has no one to be furious at. Then you had better give her someone, Renly said gently. Preferably not me. You, I do not mind. You were made for it. Stannis' eyes flicked across a second ledger. Scanning. Sorting. Littlefinger should be careful when he plays at being methodical. One can see the places he grew bored and the places he grew interested. And where is he now? Renly asked. Bored or interested? Gone, Stannis said. He looked at the door as if he could see through the oak and iron. For now. When Renly left him, Stannis worked until the light in the slit windows went from white to amber to bruised blue. Candles made pools of sour wax on the boards. His clerks went uneasy to and fro, heels rasping, quills scratching. It was the kind of work that made time run in a thin stream, hard to see but hard to stop once it had started. He did not notice the new man until he was close, holding the table's edge and clearing his throat like a dockman in a septi. Dennis, he said, and the name carried no title but a freight of loyalty heavier than any chain. Davos Seaworth had the kind of face Stannis thought men should have, a thing pared down to what it must be, and nothing more, weather edgings intact. He wore his knighthood as if it were something he had bought used off a less practical man, and had been grateful to find with no holes. You stink of fish, Stannis said. There was no reproof in it. Some part of him had always stunk of old salt and an onion's sweetness. The port. Busy, Davos said. And watchmen with new boots. Men talk when their feet stop hurting. Stannis made a note with his quill that spattered a small star of ink. Good. Your brothers looked like lads in the throne room, Davos said, his voice low. Men came and went around them. The counting room had become a kind of slow river. One all dressed up to go to a feast, one to go to war. And which am I? Dennis said. Davos' mouth twitched. The one with the bill. Stannis almost smiled. Find me a man named Tobhomat. He's a smith with more reputation than most. I want his accounts from the last 5 years, the work he has done for the crown. A smith's accounts, Davos said. He did not ask why. He had learned long ago that Stannis' whys were not like other men's. They were not flowers grown to be admired, but taproots that ran down and down seeking water. I'll bring them. And Davos, Stannis said. On your way to him, stop at the Street of Silk and the Street of Flower and all the streets of things that make men weak. Pick a door at random and find me a black-haired boy too old to be a girl's and too young to be a man's. Bring me his name. He turned a page, his voice as flat as ever, as if he asked for iron nails. I will need more than one eventually. Davos stood a moment very still, as if a hawk's shadow had crossed him. A black-haired boy. They are all over this city, Stannis said. He did not look up. Jon Arryn saw some of them. Jon Arryn is dead, Davos said. Not to contradict, but as a man might say, the tide is out. That is why I will look instead, Stannis said, and moved his finger down the column until a figure caught and stuck. Here is a coin I do not recognize, he said to the paper. And I do not like not knowing my own money. In the cool corridor that led from the counting rooms to the Hand's Tower, Renly walked with Loras Tyrell, who carried himself like a sword unsheathed that did not know it read as a threat. Loras's beauty had never seemed as wild to Renly as to the rest of the city. To Renly it was simply Loras. The curve of cheek, the quick-footed grace, the laugh that turned like a pennant on a gust. Tonight the laugh came less easily. You did not tell me he would do both, Loras said. His voice had a hush in it, a night at an unlit door. Neither did he, Renly said. Robert is a storm. You can watch the clouds all day and still not say where the lightning will fall. And now it has struck your house, Loras said, smiling slightly. You will not pretend to me that you do not want this. I have wanted many things, Renly said. His hand drifted to the chain at his neck and then away. Robert does not like other people wanting things. Then you had best be cleverer at wanting them, Loras said. There is a banquet tonight. Mace will want to present you with the world cut into slices. I will stop him if you like. Bell so. Let him present it, Renly said, amused despite himself. We will take the slices we can eat without choking. He slowed on the stairs and laid his hand on the window's deep stone frame. The city had gone more gray than gold now, fires coming on like eyes. I will need you to be my sword. Against your brother? Loras asked. Against his enemies, Renly said. Which will sometimes be my brother. I would like those times not to be too many. Then you will have to feed him as well as you restrain him, Loras said. Men can be led by their hungers. That is a thing my house knows. Renly's lips curled. Do they know it about you? They know it as far as they need to, Loras said, and leaned in to kiss Renly once, light as the brush of a feather. Your brother is not the only one who can keep accounts. When Renly reached his chambers, he found a letter waiting sealed in plain wax with no mark on it. He held it over a candle until the wax grew soft and lifted it with a nail. The hand inside was neat, the ink brown as dried blood. My Lord Hand, it read, as if that had been written 100 times already. My Lord Hand, my Lord Hand, my Lord Hand. A friend counsels that the king's new accounts will find only what the old ones permit, if the old accounts are allowed to run beneath them like streams under paving. The friend wonders whether the hand desires a dry walk. There was a little drawing in the corner, faint and quick, of a bird that might have been a dove if you did not look too closely. Renly let himself smile. Varys, he said to the empty room. and the room seemed briefly to listen. Cersei did not dine in the royal apartments that night. Her women saw to her hair as if polishing bright metal. When Jaime came to her, he did not knock. He had never had to. She watched him in the mirror as he came, the white cloak trailing like the bedsheet of a pricked lordling, brought half naked to his execution. He came like a man coming to water he had thought dried. That was one of the pretty things he did, his ways of walking. She loved him for them all, and loathed him for them too. "Your brother has been made hand," she said. He had heard it, of course. She said it for the taste of it, as one might say lilac or arsenic. "Robert likes his family around him when he does something foolish," Jaime said. He sat and took a grape from a dish more out of habit than hunger. "It spares him the trouble of laying blame at a stranger's door." "He will not need strangers," Cersei said. "Stannis will give his righteousness to anyone who will wear it long enough for him to feel naked. Renly has the vanity of a child. Put a chain on him and he'll dance, but not to my tune. Not at first." She turned and let her hair fall like a cloth of gold. Jaime's eyes on her were a warmth more pleasant than the day's heat. "Can you kill a man without undressing him?" "I could do many things," Jaime said lazily. "Whom would you like undressed?" "Pater," she said. "But only to see what he hides. I'll do him later." "Whatever he hides," Jaime said, "it's small. That's his talent." He stretched as a cat stretches. "Tywin will be amused." Cersei's mouth made a shape she knew would have scandalized a septa. "Send your raven and amuse him." "I do not carry his messages," Jaime said. "No," she said and took his hand. "You carry mine." In the prince's quarters, an 8-year-old boy with hair too pale and eyes a little too far apart sulked when told he could not pour wine for the banquet, because the hall would be too crowded, and he would muss his doublet. Joffrey asked his mother why his uncle Renly should get to sit so close to the king if his father had always said Renly's sword was too light for serious work. "Because I say so," Cersei said. And Joffrey pouted in a way that would become, with years and wine and the right audience, a cruelty he found delicious. Tommen chased a kitten beneath the bed and came up with a scratch and a look of theological surprise. Across the city in the shadow black, where streets dreamed of the river and woke with their mouths full of silt, a boy with hair black as a crow's wing and eyes the color of strong tea carried a basket for a man who bought casks of wine he watered in the alley. The boy's name was Bara, when his mother needed to love him and piss for what most others used. By the time the night made the fish market gutters a shiny ribbon of rot, he had forgotten the look of the man who looked at him too long, and then longer still, and finally said something to the wine cellar that made the wine seller's hand go greedy on the boy's shoulder. "What's in a name?" Petyr Baelish said to Varys as they walked the southern gallery, their reflections thin and doubtful in the evening's glazing of sky in the window glass. He had gilded the evening with wine already, and felt clean with it, the way a cut can feel clean when you pour spirit on it. The burn that meant you were not yet a corpse. "A great deal I have found," Varys said, his hands folded like a pair of fat white birds taking their rest. "For instance, Lord Baelish, your name opens many doors that other names do not." "And closes others," Petyr said. He smiled sideways. "A hand is a hand, but fingers are very useful." Varys' smile was placid as a lake in a palace garden. "I would not worry about it too much, my lord. One cannot be a hand without fingers. One cannot be a eunuch without a—" Varys' smile did not move. "The word you are about to say, my lord, has a way of lodging in the ears of servants and coming out of their mouths later, when one least desires it." Petyr spread his hands. "You have your little birds. Let them sing. I have enjoyed their songs, but it is astonishing what a different tune the same bird will warble when fed by another hand." "Tsk," Varys said gently, a language unto himself. "Do you know, we are fortunate." "In what sense?" Petyr said. "In the sense that the king has decided to make a fire of his own kindling," Varys said, and spread his soft hands. "We may be permitted to warm ourselves." Petyr watched the hands tower harden out of the dusk's gray, watched the windows take on the color of flame. "I am not fond of being cold," he said, "but I enjoy the view from the roof. On a night like this in Winterfell, The smoke from the kitchens would have hung low and blue, and the weirwood leaves would flicker like tongues in a stone mouth. Eddard Stark sat beneath the heart tree with a rolled parchment open on his knee, and let the voices of the castle find their own path to his ear. The word from King's Landing had reached him by ravens, twins as if the birds had been born in one nest. Renly hand, Stannis coin. Cat had said little at once and more later. Renly, she said finally, kneeling to adjust the hem of Sansa's gown. As Sansa practiced her new stitches on a scrap of old fine linen. Renly is young. He is, Ned said. He had known Renly a little in the south. He had liked him far more than he had liked Stannis. But liking and trust were cousins who forgot to write. The parchment lay on his knee, and he read the words again. Not because he needed to, but because a part of him did not trust his own eyes yet. Jon Arryn dead, the raven had said. Renly hand, a second line beneath it, as if the two facts were meant to be seen with the same glance. Stannis master of coin. The ink had dried in the time it had taken the birds to fly north. The words were now older than any surprise Ned might feel at them. If Stannis keeps a ledger, Ned said, it will be honest. He remembered Stannis at Storm's End, with a hurt in him like hunger. He remembered the Onion Night, as if he had been such a minor miracle that men forget to kneel. He remembered Robert laughing and young Renly's eager feet, and the way things slid into place when you were young, and did not yet know that places could spit you out again. Honest and hard, he will not spend coin to please the city. Sansa, Cat said mildly, you will snag your thread if you pull so. And Sansa, who could pull thread as if it had wronged her, eased her hand a fraction. Honest and hard makes the small folk as uneasy as dishonest and soft. But there are worse things. Ben Sao. Littlefinger is worse, Ned said. Petyr Baelish had the keys to the kingdom's pockets too long. You do not like him, Cat said softly. He looked at her. She did not look at him. She stared at the slightly crooked seam Sansa was making this evening, and Ned felt a feeling like winter come into him. Nor he me, he said. Then perhaps it is good, she said. If Renly is hand, he will not come north and take you away from your sons. Nor bring you south, Ned said, as if that mattered more. The god's wood was full of the soft hiss of leaves. The heart tree stared at him with its red eyes, as if expecting him to pray again, after many years of neglect. He had found no ease in prayer. There were matters a man might bring to gods, and there were others that simply belonged to men. Renly hand, he said again, as if the words might crack and show him something under them. Stannis coin. Cat's hand went to the carved trunk beside her and rested there. The king trusts his brothers. He trusts them to be themselves, Ned said. That is something. In the throne room, the next morning, Renly wore sober colors and a face that hung from him like an unaccustomed cloak. He had never much liked the dawn. He thought it a little vulgar, like a handsome man who made too much of his handsomeness. But the morning made workmen's voices carry further than wisdom, and he liked to hear the keep wake. He had a rolled paper in his hand, and 3 more under his arm, and a clerk breathing wetly behind him like a dog. His vista would be the Iron Throne for as long as he bore the chain. It had to become ordinary. Lord Stannis is in the counting rooms, Varys murmured near his elbow. Renly had begun already to lose the ability to know how the eunuch got his words so close to his ear. He has sent for the Master of Ships and the Master of Laws. The Lord Treasurer complains that he has been split into too many masters. There is no Lord Treasurer, Renly said. Indeed, Varys said with a look of innocent puzzlement upon a face that had never truly been innocent. I wonder whose hand that household will kiss now. Mine, Renly said. And Varys's head tilted in a manner so minute it could have been a swallow worrying a crumb. Then I bring you the first kiss, Varys said, and bowed in that floating move of his, the silk of his sleeves breathing like a sleeping child. Do not expect flowers, Renly said. We will not be married today. Disappointment is a burden I have learned to carry with grace, Varys said. May I offer my congratulations on the swift demise of Lord Baelish's employment? You may, Renly said. But do not expect me to believe you mean them. Meaning, Varys said. Like coin, derives most of its terror from the numbers that lie behind it. He smiled as if to be sweet. Your brother is looking for a child. Stannis? Renly laughed before he could remember to be a hand and save his laughter for moments that would cost him less. Then he will be poor company for one. Perhaps, Varys said. He asks for black hair. Renly's laugh did not wholly die. It turned into something that touched a colder organ in him. Why? You are the hand, Varys murmured. Ask him. I will, Renly said. And if I do not like the answer, I will ask my other brother. Beware that your brothers do not put you between them, Varys said with a gentle little gossip's shudder. And turn your chain into a rope. Renly found Stannis with the Master of Ships and the Master of Laws, both of whom looked uncomfortable in different ways. The former because he was being scolded, the latter because he was thinking of being scolded later. Which was worse? There will be inspections of the portage, Stannis said without preamble, and of weights and measures. Every scale in the fish market has grown light in the last 6 years. By what miracle do fish grow less heavy as the tide rises? Though miracles are somewhat outside the law's purview, the Master of Laws murmured. Then this is not a miracle, Stannis said. It is theft. We will change it. He turned as Renly entered, and his eyes, which were not so dark as Robert's nor so bright as Renly's, did a familiar small narrowing. You, he said simply. Me, Renly said, with the little tilt of his mouth that could be thanks or jest. Why a boy with black hair? Stannis watched him for a long beat that would have been comfortable if the two of them had ever had a talent for comfort together. Because there are too many in this city, Stannis said. More than can be accounted for by lust, which I have no interest in accounting for. Jon Arryn began a little book about it. He is dead. I doubt that his death and his book are separate. Renly felt the room turn on him a little like a fish turning in a net. He had known Jon Arryn kindly, as one knows winter. If Jon had been murdered, it had been by someone who thought themselves above winter. Black hair, he said. What do you think it means? I do not think, Stannis said. I look. Then I will tell you what I think. Is this about the king's bastards? Renly said and saw the flinch that was not quite a flinch cross the Master of Law's brow. It is about the realm's heirs, Stannis said. I will tell you nothing more until I know it better. If I find what I think I might find, I will tell you everything, he added without mercy, and then you will not sleep well. Renly felt for the chain at his throat again, and did not touch it. If this is a matter for the hand, then you will report to me. Not to Robert. I will report to the realm, Stannis said. You are its hand. For my sins. He turned away. Master of Ships, I expect your docks reasonable by sunset. Master of Laws, learn your miracles. Cersei watched Stannis cross the keep like a knife sliding inside a sleeve. Her women chattered behind her about silks and plum brandy, about a new singer in the street of silk whose voice made men think of their mothers and hate themselves for it. She had never much liked the chatter of women, though she wore it when she must as other women wore jewels. She had a letter from her father unopened on the table to remind her why she could not afford to be stupid. She touched the seal and did not break it. We will deny any new loans until the King's Council demonstrates a capacity for sense, Tywin would say. And then he would do what the Lannisters always did. Open his purse when the price bought him what he wanted, and shut it when the price bought someone else their pretty toy. She did not need to open the letter to know the smell of it. It would be clean and hard with nothing of the perfumed hesitation other men wore. Your Grace, her woman said. Leave me, Cersei said. And when the room was empty, she stood very still and listened to the keep's heart. The beat of it, a long, slow iron sound, like a well bucket lowered. Renly, and.Gwal. Stannis coin. She could not bar a door that had already been thrown open. She could decorate the doorway so those who walked through it would think themselves somewhere else. Summon Lord Pettier, she said at last. And when he came, he smiled as if he had been waiting in the corridor for the call. He smelled faintly of mint and iron and something like paper. You have lost your place, she told him. I have lost the privilege of being blamed for what the king owes, he said. But I am not a man who is easy to misplace. I shall be sure to put you where you can be found, she said. Stannis counts. He will count long and publicly and make a noose of his numbers. Perhaps, Petyr said. Yet no one hangs without a stool to kick. Will you be my stool? She said sweetly. I will be your ladder, he said, and bowed. And when he straightened, his eyes were as green as old copper. Ladders, my lady, are best climbed when men are looking elsewhere. What do you want? She asked. She had found long ago that men were easier when you made them say it out loud. Only to serve the realm, he said. And myself, which is usually the same thing if one is clever. She laughed. And this time it felt almost natural. Clever men get clever ends. I prefer happy ones, he said. Sometimes they look the same at dusk. He glanced toward the window, where the evening laid itself thin as silk upon the city. Shall I bring you a singer? There is a boy who makes men remember their mothers. Bring me a butcher, she said. We will need him before long. In the Dragonstone apartments that had been kept oddly intact within the Red Keep. Rooms more salt than stone for Stannis even here. Davos brought a man with a book and a boy with a scar on his lip. The smith's book showed a page for a helm commissioned, one for a gorget, one for a blade with rubies in its hilt. It showed no entries in the neat places where a king's name should have appeared, but men remembered. The boy's name was not Bara, after all but Gendry, though he had a friend called Bara who had died of a cough last winter. He did not look like a prince, but he looked like Robert had looked at 13. A brow like a beam, eyes brown as a butted barrel, hair that would not lay down when the wind told it. Stannis felt a cold line in his spine that had little to do with weather. You like your work? He asked the boy. Yes, my lord, the boy said, chin up in a way that made Stannis wanted to tell him to take it down. Then he would not. The world would knock it down for him enough times that arrogance would not be his danger. You remember a man who came to talk to you? Stannis asked. Lots of men talk to me, Gendry said with a boy's glumness. A lord with a bird on his throat, Davos murmured from the wall. Gendry's eyes flicked. He said the king was my father. Stannis did not move. And what did you say? I said I had work, Gendry said. Good, Stannis said at last. Have you an honest master? Oh, honest as he is rich, Gendry said, and Stannis almost smiled again for the second time that day. He says he has to be. Rich men who are honest, Stannis said, are often so because they can afford it. He turned to the smith and his book, and to Davos. We will need a list, he said. We will need many lists. Lists, Davos said mildly. Aye. Should I begin with black-haired boys, or with men who would prefer blonde heirs? Begin with the truth, Stannis said, and then we will see whom it hurts. In the next days, the keep learned new habits. The kitchens discovered that the master of coin calculated how much fish must truly be thrown away, ruined by the heat, and how much could be saved. The city watch found that a coin delivered in a dark corner to the right sergeant bought half the slack it had last week, and no more. The harbor found the men who weighed bales of Tyroshi silk were now watched by men who watched the watchers, and were themselves watched by a clerk who could not be bribed because he owed his cousins. Children's dinner to milk. Such things spread like weeds if you did not pull them, and were like flowers if you tended them. Renly went to feasts and to the king's council, both with a new gravity that made him more handsome, if less dear. Cersei smiled and watched, and did not move her knight on the board, until the opponent had committed to a second poor piece. Varys drifted and whispered. Petyr clucked the tongues of his pockets and found coins that had not been there before. And Robert hunted. He hunted boar out past the Roserad, stag in the Kingswood where the oak trunks went up like cathedral pillars and the light fell green and damp and moving. He laughed more than he had in some months, and drank less than he had in some years. His knee hurt the same. The day he ran a boar into a stand of saplings where the beast turned and showed him an eye that said God, and saw nothing of gods, he threw his spear and missed and laughed until his men thought he had gone mad. I used to be better, he said later by the fire to no one in particular. The meat was stringy and bled into the trenchers. He held a bone and set his teeth to it, and thought suddenly of a different boar, another forest, Another day that had been the start of all the days after. He got drunk then, and his men were relieved. Renly went to him in the solar when the sun was a pale coin in the sky. "You cannot keep the Tyrells waiting forever," he said. "Mace is full of importance. He may burst." "I will have the roof scrubbed," Robert said. He had ink on one finger, and he stared at it as if someone had marked him with a child's toy. "Does your friend want me to marry his sister?" "My friend," Renly said evenly, "wants what any friend wants for his house." "And if I set Cersei aside?" Robert said. The question came like a coin flicked on a table. "What would your chain weigh then, hand?" "Less," Renly said. "Or more? I cannot say. But I can say the realm may bear it if it is done cleanly." "Is there a clean way to cut a woman's throat?" Robert said. "Yes," Renly said. "You do not miss." Robert stared at him then. He had never understood Renly's hardness when it appeared. It was not Stannis kind. The kind made by siege and rationed food and prayers you did not say. It was a hardness born of polish, like steel that had spent too long being admired. Robert looked at the boy who had become a man and saw again that sideways flash of Rhaegar, the way the prince had looked from beneath his helm, from some angle of sun. He shut his eyes and for a moment wished, with a deep childishness that embarrassed him, to be back on the Vale's green grass with dawn gleaming, and a man to hit that he did not have to love. "Talk to Stannis," he said at last. "Talk to the snake. They will give you the same advice in different languages." "Betty." "Stannis will say the law," Renly said. "He will tell me that wives are holy to the gods and unholy to everyone else. And the snake, do you mean Varys or Petter?" "I mean the one you will have to cut in half to see whether it has a heart," Robert said. "Take your pick." Renly did not laugh. He could hear a new noise in the city that had not been there before. The counting of coin as it traveled along streets. Men saying things like "that is enough," and "that is a little less." Prayers being offered for downwarded prices. Curses when upwarded ones arrived. He went to the council chamber where the long table had seen confessions and conspiracies and last dinners before deaths. He found Stannis already there, with his hand upon a map, as if he might press shapes into the parchment. Little smooth counters were set upon towns and ports, like abstracted prayers. "Do you plan to invade the Iron Bank?" Renly said. "No," Stannis said. "To avoid it." He flicked 2 counters from King's Landing to Casterly Rock with a forefinger that never quite lost its childhood inkishness. "Tywin writes," Renly said. "Hey, counsels restraint." "Tywin counsels Tywin," Stannis said. "He will deny new loans to us until he sees if we will beg. He will grant them if we swear a string of small obediences in the room where we keep the crown's pride, and do not show it." "What does a string of obediences look like?" Renly asked. "It looks like men with Lannister colors in this keep," Stannis said. "And coin that stands and salutes when a lion passes. It looks like more quarry stones at Casterly Rock and fewer at the Red Keep." His eyes rose. "Will you let me cut a little from the Queen's wardrobe?" Renly was silent for a beat that contained an entire council, with performances by actors wearing masks of all of them. "Yes," he said. "Tell her you cut a little from the King's cups as well." "I already have," Stannis said without triumph. "He will not feel it for 3 days. On the 4th, he will complain. On the 5th, he will not." "Men are wide see." Renly set his fingers upon the edge of the table. "And the boys?" Stannis did not bother to pretend confusion. "Gendry," he said. "I have a name now. There will be more. I found a girl named Bara. Her hair is black and her eyes are brown. The boy is dead. A cough. There is no ledger for these things. I will have to keep it in my head." Renly felt something in him that had been all flicker and fun at last go still. "If there are enough of them," he said carefully, feeling his way in the fog as he spoke. "More than you think lust can account for, what then?" "Then the Queen is a liar and a traitor," Stannis said, the words falling like stones into a well. "And Robert is a fool. And the city is afire," Renly said softly. "And we are standing with oil on our boots." "Then take off your boots," Stannis said, "or put on shoes from iron." Renly left him and went up to the roof where he could stand at the keep's edge and look down and see the city move without touching it. The wind came honest. A spray of gulls rose from the bay like a rumor and settled again. He remembered for a brief hot instant a day when he had been a boy on the storm wall, and the wind had lifted him until for a heartbeat he had believed he could fly. He had laughed then. Now he put both hands on the warm stone and let the heat sink into his palms until it hurt. Loras came to him there with no sound, an ability Renly could not have explained even to himself. "You are thinking," Loras said. "I am," Renly said. "Shall I stop you?" "Not yet," Renly said softly, and reached without looking to find Loras' hand. The sea spoke in its long language. The city below them scratched and rolled and purred and coughed. In the scullery were men who were not allowed to speak while the queen ate, let words spill like broth. Someone said that the new hand had been seen walking the street of Flower at dusk without guards, and someone else said that meant he was brave, and someone else said it meant he was stupid, and an old woman with a mole on her neck said it meant he wanted to be seen doing it. In the wine sinks of Fleabottom, men held cups nearer to their bodies when the watch passed, and laughed less because laughing in public brought you to notice. In the street of silk, a singer sang a song about a king with two brothers who were a sword and a lute, and he left out the ending because endings were dangerous. Various little birds came and went, and one brought him a crumb of something as sweet and dangerous as sugared fire. He held it in his palm and watched the light from the window pass across it, and thought of how rarely men asked themselves whether the songs they had paid to hear were worth the price they would later pay to forget them. "Your Grace," he said in the council chamber later, when the room was full to its edges with men whose faces were their own banners, "a rumor has flown. It has acquired feathers on the way. Pluck them," Robert said. He was in better humor today, which meant his temper would be worse when it turned. "What bird has flown into our cage now?" Varys let the hush claim the room for him, and then set the crumb on the table, in the middle of the ink stains and dents. "That Lord Stannis has spoken to a smith's boy who might have been born in a bed not far from here, in a bed the king did not sleep in." "What?" Robert said, and the word hit the wood. Across the table, Cersei's lashes made a shadow on her cheek, like a net thrown over a fish. Renly's hand stilled upon his papers. Littlefinger smiled, as if someone had told him a small lie that flattered him. Pycelle coughed a fine little cough that might have been from dust, and might have been from thought. Stannis did not lower his eyes. "I spoke to a boy," he said. "He works at the forge of a man called Tabo Mott. He makes nails and dreams." "What has that to do with anything?" Robert said. "You tell me about every boy you speak to now." "This one has your face," Stannis said. The room went very quiet. "Or rather, the face you had before wine." Robert stared at him. Then he barked a laugh that came out broken. "There are 100 like him in the city." "Yes," Stannis said. "That is what interests me." Cersei's smile came then, easy and light, as a summer day. "My husband's appetites were never a secret," she said. "Or do we now make bastardy a crime in our pious realm?" "Bastardy is not the crime," Stannis said. He felt the line in his back again, the one that had come when Davos entered with a boy. "There is another crime that might be. I am not yet ready to name it." "Then do not speak it," Cersei said. "Your tastes run to naming things, Lord Stannis. Names have power. Best not to break the ones we all live under." Renly felt the dove of Varys' letter in his pocket, the little sketch that looked like innocence until you saw the beat. He looked from his brother to his queen to his king, and saw that the board was being set whether he wanted to play or not. The pieces were pretty and sharp. He thought of Marguerite Tyrell's portrait, which had arrived yesterday from Highgarden with a basket of pears that had been perfectly ripe and had gone too soft before noon. The girl had a face made to make men think of lilacs, even in winter. He wondered if Robert could smell flowers anymore. "We will adjourn," he said, voice even. And the chain at his throat did not feel as heavy as it had a moment before. "We will meet again at sunset. Lord Stannis, you will present what you have found. The rest of us will consider what we may be about to step into." "Sunset," Robert said, as if the word contained its own promise. "Good. I have meat to eat before then." He stood, and his chair growled. "Cersei, come walk with me." He did not look at her when he said it. He did not look at anyone at all. When the room had emptied, Renly stood alone a long time. The windows to the west were beginning their slow gather of red. The long table in front of him had the scars of a generation's worth of knives and cups and fists. He put his hand over one gouge that might have been made by his brother in a temper, and found that it fit. Then he said very softly, to no one, "Do not miss." And down in the counting room, Stannis sharpened quills as if they were pikes, and laid a row of figures like men along a wall. Davos brought him names: Bara, Gendry, Maya in a high place in the Vale, the boy at the forge, the girl at the wharf, the small dark-haired child in a brothel where the madam had a soft spot, because the woman had once looked like her when she caught herself in the mirror by candlelight. Stannis did not write their stories, only their names and hair and eyes. He was not a poet. He would leave poetry to those who wanted to feel clean when they had finished. He wanted to be dirty until the end, if it meant he was right. The sun slid. The city took its breath for the night. A singer on a corner sang about a stag who could not see his own antlers. Men listened and nodded and went home and fought with their wives, and loved them and slept. In a room off the street of Flower, a boy slept with his head upon his arms and dreamed of a sword that had his name on it. In the Hand's Tower, a young lord lay with a knight and did not think of the law, which was someone else's weapon. In a queen's bed, a woman rested her cheek upon silk and thought of a bell that would ring once and then again and then not at all. In the God's Wood of Winterfell, an old man listened to leaves and heard in them an ocean he had only ever seen once. When the bells of the great sept called the sunset prayer, the small council gathered again. The room smelled of ink and wax and the faint iron tang of a day's heat, leaving stone. Stannis laid his book upon the table. Renly folded his hands upon the wood and set his face. Robert came late and sat as if the chair had offended him, and he meant to punish it with his weight. Varys floated. Petyr smiled. Pycelle wheezed. The world turned. "Let us hear it," Renly said. "And let us not, if we may, say more than we must." Stannis opened his book and began to read the names of children as if he were calling a roll before a march. He spoke each one as if it had been written on his tongue with iron. The room, which had so often been the theater of clever men's little plays, grew strangely hollow and true. Each name was a tap on a door. Somewhere, the door would open. Somewhere, a man would come out with a sword. Somewhere, a woman would light a candle. "And what does this prove?" Cersei said at last, a woman who had decided not to be shaken. "That the king is a man. That the king is a man," Stannis said. "And that some men are not." "Enough," Robert said, the word carrying a weight that silenced even the cough and the silk. He rose, and for the first time in a long time the man he had been looked out of his face. "We will not decide this at a table. We will decide it with eyes. Bring me the smith's boy." Renly looked at Stannis and saw a spark that might have been grim satisfaction, or might have been the distant light of a fire he had not started and could not put out alone. "As you wish, your grace," Stannis said. "And Renly," Robert said, turning his head so slowly it might have been turned by a gear, "bring the Tyrell's portrait." Renly inclined his head. "I already have," he said, and the king snorted as if surprised at something and pleased by it. They dispersed into the keep like parts of a cut thing, each piece with a little blood on it. Night gathered. The city lay under it like a beast under a cloak. In its sleep, the Red Keep dreamed of knives. Out on the bay, far past the dark line of the breakwater, a ship from Old Town lifted on a swell and dropped again. On its afterdeck, a man in a weather-stained cloak with a bald head and a scar through his ear watched the city lights and stroked his beard and thought of a book he had read as a boy that had said kings were made by gods and unmade by men. He had laughed at it then. Now, he did not laugh. The wind changed. He turned his face to it and welcomed the new smell it brought, because he was an honest man. And honest men knew that truth had a scent like iron at the back of the throat. In the counting room, Stannis closed his ledger and blew the candle out. He stood a moment in the dark until the shape of the table presented itself to him as if it could see him back. "Davos," he said into the dark. "Ay," Davos said from the doorway, a shape also without a face. Get some sleep, Stannis said. Tomorrow we will look at the boy. Aye, Davos said again, and did not move. Go, Stannis said. I will be here when you return. He was. He would be until he could no longer scrape the grit of dust from under his nails with his teeth. It was a small kind of holiness, but it was the only kind he knew. Ka. At dawn the Red Keep woke as a ship wakes, with the soft slap of waves against its hull, with the creak and mutter of ropes, with men rubbing sleep from their eyes as if the night were something caught there. In the low light, the corridors were blue as bruises. Davos Seaworth came up through the belly of the keep, with a boy at his side, and a smith behind them bearing a wrapped parcel, as careful as a septon bearing relics. The boy moved like a colt that had not yet learned where its legs ended. He carried a bundle too large for him, slung on his shoulder, and glanced everywhere, but at the gold cloaks posted at intervals along the way. Keep your eyes ahead, lad, Davos murmured, which was what he told his sons when the wind blew wrong and a mast made a sound he did not like. Walls don't stare back at you. The boy flashed him a look that had something of defiance and something of fear, and all of it like a face Davos had seen once when he had been younger and had sailed under a sky crowded with wings. He could not say whose it was until they passed a narrow window that gave a slit of the sea, and the boy's eyes, which had looked brown in the smithy soot, took the light and came up the blue of deep water. That small shift turned the resemblance from a rumor to a shout. Here, Davos said, softer. Mind your tongue in there. Answer to what's asked. Don't make more to punish yourself with. Gendry nodded, Adam's apple bobbing once. He wore a plain jerkin, clean but stained with life. The big hands hung at his sides looking for work to do. He had not brought the bull's helm. Tubbo Mott had wrapped that like treasure, and held it himself in two hands, as if the iron inside had remembered fire, and might jump to it again, if you were careless. In the small council chamber, the air kept cool out of habit, rather than design. Stannis stood at one end of the table with his ledger closed before him, as if he suspected it would try to open on its own if he took his eyes off it. Renly sat in the hands chair and did not lean back into it. He had learned since yesterday that chairs could swallow you if you gave them too much of your spine. Cersei had not yet come. Robert had, and sprawled rather than sat, but there was a tightness about him like a belt a size too small. Varys floated at his accustomed distance, and Pettier arrived between one blink and the next, with a face that said he had been there all along, and you were unobservant. Pycelle arranged himself with ceremony enough for a wedding, pulled a silk from his sleeve, and pressed it to his mouth, as if piety might escape if he didn't keep it penned. You brought me a boy, Robert said when Davos and Gendry were shown in. The voice was light and heavy at once. Where's the boar? Your Grace, Davos said, bowing in that plain way that had infuriated men of rank and endeared him to Stannis. This here is Gendry, apprentice to Tubbo Mott. This is his master. Tubbo Mott bowed deeper than Davos and made a smooth act of it, like a courtier in a forged apron. He was a big man worn down a little by heat rather than years, his eyes clear as coin. He turned his parcel up onto the table and drew the wrappings back. The helm inside had a rough strength to it that did not apologize for the lack of polish. It was a bull's visage, blunt and purposeful, the horns set at the angle that told a man who had seen cattle from the wrong side that he had a moment yet to move or be moved. My lad's work, Mott said, not humble and not proud. Only factual. He has hands for iron. Robert stared from the helm to the boy, and Davos watched a thing pass across the king's face that he had seen pass across a sailor's when a fog lifted and the shore he had prayed for and feared to name presented itself. Robert's eyes kindled, cooled, then kindled again. You, he said, and rose, and came closer without any of the show that made courtiers clap. Up close, the smell of hunting and wine and something like crushed bay leaves came off him. He looked the boy over head to heel with a soldier's eye that did not pretend modesty. What's your name? He asked. Gendry, the boy said hoarsely. Lord. Your Grace, Stannis said, and Gendry swallowed and burned red to his hairline. Your Grace, he said, as if the words were brick and he had never lifted the like before. Robert's mouth curled. "Who told you I was your father?" he asked. Gendry's eyes cut to Davos as a pup's might cut to a man who had pulled a thorn from its paw. Davos picked at the rough skin near his thumb with his other hand and kept his own counsel. "A lord with a bird on his throat," Gendry said finally. Littlefinger's smile did something refined and small. "Birds," he murmured, "will sing for any bread." "And what did you say?" Robert asked the boy. Gendry's jaw worked. "I said I had work," he muttered. Robert barked a laugh, not altogether pleasant, and not altogether unpleased. "And have you?" he said, and nodded at the helm. "That's no toy." "I made it," Gendry said. He squared himself as if to be struck and chose the blow. "And the visor, the hinges, the strap." Robert's hand went to the bull's face, as if to cup it as one might cup a child's cheek. His fingers ran along the horn, as if to test its cant. He had always loved good metal more than most kings loved gold. He knocked a knuckle against it, and took the weight of it in both hands and set it on his head without asking, and lifted his chin. The room held its breath. The helm sat heavy and right. It obscured the eyes, but did not need to show them to show the face beneath. "Ha!" Robert said and took it off. And his own face was young for a blink, as if a gust had blown a century off him, and then returned it. He looked at the boy again, and this time did not quite look away. "You've your mother's name." "Don't know," Gendry said, lowering his chin as if he had been instructed, once and for all, not to look up. "She poured ale, died. That narrows it," Littlefinger murmured as if to himself. Renly's eyes found him, and did not move. The silence that fell then had a smell. It smelled like the moment before a forge's bright sound. It smelled like iron wanting to be other than iron. Stannis tapped a knuckle against his ledger. "The point," he said, "is not whether the boy is the king's. The point is that there are dozens who could be. You say dozens as if it were a crime." Cersei said, entering with Jaime at her shoulder, and 2 white cloaks behind them, like the wings of a harsh bird. Her gown spilled sunlight into the chamber as if to correct the lack of it. "I'd have thought it proof of kingship in certain circles." Her gaze skated over Gendry, and did not catch, slid to the helm, and assessed it with a cold, quick intelligence that never seemed to attach to anything she did not wish to own. "Well," she said, "that is a thing." "A thing," Robert said. He set the helm down careful as an infant, and did not look at his wife. "This boy will be apprenticed nearer the keep. I'll not have him stolen from me by some merchant who thinks he can buy faces." Tabo Mott bristled with a craftsman's concealed pride. "With respect, your grace. The face is mine until he buys it for himself. I have put good food into that belly and better iron into those hands." "And I will put better," Robert said. "He will work at the king's own forge. If you want compensation, Stannis will give you accurate numbers until your eyes bleed." Stannis did not blink. "We will pay you fairly," he said, "to within a halfpenny that you can find on the page, and not a farthing more." Mott made a courtly little show of acquiescence, and looked as if he meant it. He had the sense of a man who could count without ink. "An honor," he said, and drew back the wrappings around the helm again, as if one must always shelter what one meant to keep. Renly let the scene sink into the wood of the table, and become part of its scars. He felt the board beneath the pieces tilt, imperceptible to those who did not watch the legs. Gendry had made the room a theater. The queen had made herself an audience who did not applaud. Varys had not moved, except to breathe. But something in the line of his shoulders had changed, and Petter's fingers had tapped 3 times in a cadence that could have been a signal or a distraction or a habit. Renly shifted the ring on his smallest finger, and did not think of Loras' mouth making a smile in a dark corridor where there had been no witnesses. "Very good," he said. "If your grace is satisfied." "I am never satisfied," Robert said, and the room took it for a jest until he did not laugh. "I want the other names. The girl at Chatias. The one in the Vale. What do they call her?" "Nia Stone." Very supplied with a softness that put feathers on steel points. "A vigorous, spirited child. Well, no longer a child." Send for her, Robert said, and Renly felt the movement as a man feels the shift of a ship under him, when a wave he has not seen yet strikes its belly. Let us see what 10 years have made. She is in the Vale, Stannis said, and the Vale belongs to House Aaron. Jon is dead, Robert said roughly. His boy will not deny me. He ran a hand over his beard as if to put the words back into it where he had learned to keep them. Bring the mother and the babe from Chataya's as well. Cersei's head turned at that, in a little elegant jerk she could not have suppressed, even if she had had the wit to attempt it. To fill the court with whores? She said, making the word a small perfect jewel of contempt. And their brats? To fill the court with truth, Robert said, and something in the attention of the room went keener than scent. As when a hunting party finds a print it had not known it was looking for. If there's no lie to be told, the truth can stand with its shoes on in daylight. You always did prefer the sun, Cersei said, and smiled, as if to acknowledge an old joke that had never been funny and had always been theirs. Very well. Fill your hall. Hold up your children as a shield when men begin to throw spears. Renly found himself almost amused. There are softer things to hold up, he said. Songs, flowers, promise of feasts. He put his fingertips together under his chin and regarded his sister-by-law as one might regard a very beautiful cat. Speaking of which, your grace, the Tyrells will attend you at supper. The girl's portrait pleased the king. I had not known we were shopping, Cersei said. The word cost her nothing. She had purchased herself with it long ago. We are not, Robert said. We are weighing. He did not look at her. We are seeing if there is a way through the tangle that leaves no throats cut. There is not, Cersei said, so gently that for a moment one could almost take it for mercy. But it is an entertainment to watch you try. When the council broke and the courtiers poured their talk into the corridors, Davos lingered. Stannis stood with both hands flat on the table, as if to ask the grain to tell him what other hands had wanted from it. The room emptied around them until the silence set like cooling metal. You have set a thing in motion, Davos said. I have recognized its motion, Stannis said. If a rock rolls downhill, it is not because a man speaks its name. Men will say you pushed it, Davos said. They will say many things, Stannis said. I will not spend the realm's coin to stop their mouths. It is dear, and wastes good rope. Davos turned the helm with 2 fingers and looked into the bull's blank eyes. The boy, he said, will need a friend. The boy, Stannis said, will need a trade. He has one. An honest trade, Davos said. So do we. Yet here we are. Stannis' mouth made the faintest change. You would have me be his friend? I would have someone be, Davos said. A boy who looks like that will cause men to believe themselves braver and cleverer than they are. That brings knives. Then keep the knives off him, Stannis said. You are a knight. You know the angle at which men come. Davos inclined his head. Ay, he said. I'll keep a weather eye out. Renly, crossing a courtyard where lemon trees potted in painted tubs shone like brass in the afternoon light, met Loras where the shadows clung a little longer as if reluctance were something they could be taught. Loras leaned in a posture of studied negligence against a pillar, but his hands were restless. The way a good rider's hands are never entirely still even when the horse is. Your king met his son, Loras murmured. My brother met his past, Renly said. He unscrewed a lemon and let the rind spray hit the underside of his wrist. The clean citrus astringency cut the day's grease in his nose. And my sister by marriage sharpened her teeth. Will he do it? Loras asked, not bothering to say what it was. Set her aside? Renly said. He can. If he should, Stannis will tell him. If he will, only the gods know. And now, Loras's mouth tilted. The gods, he said, have always seemed singularly uninterested in Robert's will. They walked together along the gallery and came to a little balcony that looked down on the Queen's gardens. 3 septas led a chain of small maidens in white, who trailed their hands along lavender as if it were silk. Renly leaned his forearms upon the stone and watched the sun make copper out of blonde hair. Tonight Mace will arrive at supper with 3 schemes rolled up in his sleeves like napkins, Loras said. 1 for dowry, one for ships, one to have the Reach's grain move along the Mander, as if a magician had turned it liquid. I will eat the best of the three, Renly said. He thought of Marguerite Tyrell's painted mouth, and of the portrait painter's gentle lies. Tell him not to mistake the king's gaze for the king's word. He will not, Loras said. Mother will have taught him to know the difference and to wrestle one into becoming the other. She is better at that than he is at sums. I know, Renly said. I have learned to count. At Chataya's in the Street of Silk, the curtains were heavy, and the air sweet as a lie. The madam had learned the art of receiving lords as if they were shipwrecked, and her house the only island with drinkable water. When Stannis came with Davos behind him and 2 gold cloaks who looked as comfortable as oxen in a perfume shop, she tilted her head and made a bow a hand shorter than the one she gave to men who would pay tonight and not tomorrow. We are not here for your services, Stannis said without grace. Nobody ever is, my lord. Chataya said, and smiled in that way of hers that turned a blade into a fan. Yet I find they leave lighter than they arrived. She ran her eyes over Davos in a way that made him want to hide his old smuggler's hands behind his back, and then deliberately not do so. Your man looks honest. He is, Stannis said. That is why I brought him. Honest men are the safest in a house like mine, Chataya said. They know what they are here for, and what they are not. She nodded to a girl in a silk so thin it might have been woven from fog, and the girl vanished up a stair with feet that put no weight on steps. You want the babe. I want to see, Stannis said. Then I will decide what I want. Chataya's mouth softened in an approval that would have scandalized a septa. Sense, she said, in a lord. How rare, and how dear. She stood aside as the girl returned with another behind her. The second woman's face was pinched around the nose in that way that told Davos she had lived too long on not enough, and had not gotten over being too surprised to be alive. In her arms was a bundle that had more life in it than some grown men he had seen on decks when storms came. This is Bara, Chataya said. Both of them. The little one's hair stuck up like a field of black wheat, and her eyes were the clear gray blue of a sky between squalls. She looked about her with the total indifference of a creature who has not yet learned that the world expects it to care. Stannis looked and did not flinch. It would have been easier to meet a sword point than a child's eyes. He made his inventory. Black hair, blue eyes, the set of the mouth and the ears. He did not know the faces of babies as some men did. He had not been a father long enough to learn them. He had lost that schooling with all the rest. But he knew a pattern when he saw it. This was a number and a sum. What would you do with her? The mother asked, voice brittle, arms tightening around the child as if to keep the question out, not the answer. If the king wants her. I do not know what the king wants, Stannis said truthfully. He is a man. Wants change like weather. A realm wants sleep and food and peace. I want truth. He glanced to Davos, perhaps remembering that men preferred softer words from softer mouths. Davos took the cue. No one will take her, Davos said gently. Not like that. The king might want to see her. He may give coin, honest coin, or he may want only to know, to say to himself in a quiet room. Yes, that is so. Lady, if any harm comes to her between this day and that day, there are men who will look for whose boot stepped wrong on that road. Then? The woman swallowed and looked at Chataya, who nodded once. Bring her if they send for her, Chataya told her. If they do not, take this man's words for what they are, a kind of salt. It stings. It keeps rot away. She looked at Stannis. The king is not unkind, she said. He is uncareful with kindness. There is a difference. Stannis inclined his head an inch. We will send, he said, and turned. And the gold cloaks let out breaths they had forgotten they were holding. Outside, the Street of Silk showed its late light through gauze and colored dye. A fat, Myrish merchant argued with a thin Lorathi boy over a lace that would tangle after its second washing. Davos could not shake the image of the babe's eyes. They had that black ring in their pale blue that he had seen in the eyes of Robert and Renly, both when they laughed around a table, laden too heavy. "You will set the city on fire if you throw that into it," he said. "The city is kindling," Stannis said. "If it burns, it is because men carried sparks into it in their beards for years." At supper that night, Mace Tyrell arrived in a blaze of articulations and perfumes. He smiled with a face broadly supplied for such functions, and bowed, as if he were twice the circumference, and had calculated the exact angle at which his girth became grace. Behind him came a retinue with enough green to make the dais look like a spring field, and near the tail of that polite procession was a girl, whose presence altered the air without any visible effort of her own. Margaery's face was youthful without being silly. She wore a gown the blue of summer's highest hour, and pearls, as if they had grown by chance upon her throat. She stopped the proper distance from the king, and made a curtsy that could have been a prayer or a promise, and Renly watched the court watch her. "My lord hand," Mace boomed, after the primary obeisances had been made, and various pious invocations to harvest and weather laid carefully upon the table with the silver. "Your city makes a man hungry just to look upon it. I have brought a cook who makes a sauce for lamb that will cause even a warrior to spend a moment in contemplation." "Then we shall give him moments," Renly said, smiling just so. "And a lamb." He felt, more than saw, Cersei's attention sharpen. Margaery's glance brushed him like perfume and passed on. Loras stood that small half-step behind his family that marked a second son with a name already made. He did not look at Renly at all, because he was excellent at doing what he must when he must. Robert ate well and drank better, but less slavishly than last week. He had stag on his plate and Tyrell golden apples. And he praised both and teased Mace and laughed at a Reachman's droll story about a shepherd who had taken a stick for a staff and found it a snake. When Margaery spoke, he lowered his head, and the great battered attention of him settled upon her. She did not waste it. She spoke of gardens and of music, and of a book of hunts in Highgarden's library that had plates so fine you could see the dust in the woodcutter's imagined air. She described a hound that had chosen her brother's company over any other, and followed him even when he was in arms. And Robert smiled a father's smile that had not gotten to come out as often as it should have. Cersei watched, and did not spill wine. Renly was careful to leave space for accident. He let Mace speak of ships, and of grain, and of the taxes that choked one and watered the other. He let Stannis ask questions about measures. And he let Petyr Baelish, sitting at the end of the table, like a cat that had been allowed to remain by the fire out of habit, offer a jest that was almost good. He let Varys titter approval, and watched Pycelle overfill his wine, so that a drop caught and clung to the corner of his mouth like a jewel pinned in the wrong place. The hall's bright sound turned richer with fat and wine. The torches made their own soft sighs. From the far end of the hall came the faint, steady music of a man whose harp would outlast him. After, when the guests were permitted to flow into the gardens to walk off what they had put on, Renly found himself beside Margaery with Loras on her other side, and Mace coming up behind like weather. "You have made your city beautiful," Margaery said, which was a kind lie. At night, King's Landing could be mistaken for beautiful by those who did not have to meet it honest in the morning. "It makes itself," Renly said. "We are merely obliged to forgive and correct it." "I find forgiveness is a poor start with plants," she said. "Correction, perhaps, but best of all is good ground." She looked up at him through lashes that had their own arithmetic. "You must have very good ground to grow so many opinions." "If we did not," Renly said easily, "we would import some from the Reach, and charge only a modest fee," Loras observed. "I thought modesty was out of fashion," Renly said. Their eyes met once and slid away for form's sake. It was a fine night. Somewhere close, citrus blossoms cut the heavier scents and made room for breath. Later, in a chamber with a window that took the sea for itself, as if a painter had rubbered the rest of the world away, Robert sat with his boots off and his feet bare on cold stone, wine cup between his palms as if it were a bird he could warm. Renly came to him as the hall emptied and the white swords went to their posts, and the keep settled into what passed for sleep, when 1,000 men and twice that many women dreamed under one roof. "She is pretty," Robert said without turning his head. "She is capable," Renly said. Sometimes the two things meet. Robert said. His voice had tiredness plated into it like gray in a beard. If I put Cersei aside, I put war across my threshold. If I keep her, I put rot in my own house. He drank. Stannis will say there is a right thing and a wrong thing. There is, Renly said. And you? Robert asked. You will say there is the thing that breaks most cleanly. Yes, Renly said. If it can be done. There is no clean, Robert said, and let his head knock back against the wall once, twice. Only less blood on your hands when you wash them. You asked me to serve, Renly said. I will keep your hands as clean as I can. Robert's laugh was short and friendless. You always loved a mirror, he said. He set the cup down with a sound like a small bell and stood. Tomorrow I hunt. The day after you bring me the whore and her child, and send a raven to the eyrie. To the boy? Renly asked. He is not Jon. No, Robert said, and his face closed like a gauntlet. No one is. At the eyrie, the wind pulled at gulls as a child pulls at the laces on a boot. Sweet Robin cried when he did not get the honey he wanted, and cried when he did. And Lysa Arryn read a letter that made her wish, for one indecent heartbeat, that she had let men break her in a different way, when she had been young and tender, and had not yet decided kindness was for other women. She wrote a reply that made a show of courtesy and folded her fear into the creases. Winterfell's Godswood took another raven, and Ned Stark sat with the parchment in his hand, and the sound of the levitung in his ear, and Cat beside him, with her eyes on the ice of the bog. He stirs a nest, Ned said. He was born stamping, Cat said. Renly or Robert? Both, Ned said. Stannis is the stick. And the wasps will fly, Cat said. We will get stung even up here. Even up here, Ned agreed. He thought of Jon Arryn, and felt again the particular silence that follows a man who has always stood in a doorway when he is no longer there to stand. We will hold to our own. If the realm cracks, the North must not tumble with it. The realm will crack, Cat said, and slid her hand into his. Men have picked their teeth with its bones for years. They have gotten used to the taste. Now, in the Red Keep the next day, Bara's mother came with Shataya and her babe in arms, and the court had the spectacle it pretended not to want. The child looked about with solemn unconcern, and took a finger from a Kingsguard's offered hand, and refused to give it back until she had finished tasting it. Sir Barristan Selmy, whose white cloak had nothing of perfume about it at all, smiled with his eyes and then not at all. Jaime stood like a statue that had thought better of moving. Boros looked bored. Meryn looked hungry. Mandon looked like a knife propped against a wall. Ares looked at flowers. Preston looked a little lost. It was a house of swords, and a child had arrived in it with a piece of soft cloth and a drooling mouth. Robert took Bara in his arms like a man who had done this before so long ago. He had forgotten the exact angle, and was surprised to find his body remembered without him. The baby made a small gurgle and caught at his beard, as if she had found the very thing she had set out for when she got born. She is very pretty, Margaery Tyrell observed from an appropriate distance. Her fingers are like pearls. The pearls, Cersei said, are better strung. Do you never tire? Renly asked her pleasantly, too low to be public and too loud to be intimate. Of what? She said, eyes front. Off the taste of old wine, he said. Never, she said. Some things improve with keeping. When Stannis spoke to Robert after, it was in the counting room again. He had drawn 3 columns down a page and written beneath them with a neatness that could have been anger in chains. If you put Cersei aside without naming her crime, he said, you invite the Lannisters to name it treason and act accordingly. If you name it and can prove it, you must act accordingly. There is no path that avoids acting. Robert rubbed his face. The sound of it was the sound of a bristled brush on old wood. And if I do nothing? He asked. Then you share whatever she has done, Stannis said. Robert's laugh was a cough. You and your terms, he said. He looked down at the page. If I marry the girl from Highgarden, what does it buy me? Grain, Stannis said curtly. Ships, men with good teeth. The Reach with a claim on your side of the table, when you negotiate with the Rock. The appearance of renewal. He hesitated, which in Stannis was as good as a man's long prayer. Children, perhaps. Robert's eyes closed and opened. They had the look a man's eyes have when he has let drink open a door and found a thing behind it he had not meant to see. "Do you remember?" he said. "Stefan?" "Our father," Stannis said. I remember the lines from his palm because he closed his hand on the railing and I watched it until the sea took it away. "I remember," Robert said, and his voice was very soft. "A day when he looked at us and counted us and looked satisfied. He set that away like a man sets away a knife he knows he will need later. We will write to Old Town," he said. "We will ask the High Septon about kindness and law. We will let the Tyrells plan a feast." He picked up his cup. "And we will hunt." When the ravens went winging out, men across the 7 kingdoms lifted their faces. Or did not. At Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister read a crisp, respectful inquiry, and smiled as sparingly as a scythe, and wrote an answer that said many true things, and hid more. In Old Town the High Septon coughed, not quite piously, and sent a pair of Septons to argue with one another, until one came up with words that could be read 2 ways. In Dragonstone's wind-scoured yard, a red woman stood with her hair blowing, and watched the gulls with an expression men mistook for serenity. She had come from far, and had not yet said to herself that she had come for Stannis. "There is time," she told the wind. Even the Lord of Light needed darkness to shine against. Pettier Baelish bought a ledger from a fishmonger at the Mudgate for a price that would have kept the man's daughter in shoes for a year. He turned the pages whose corners had grown soft with salt, and found one note in a hand, not unlike his, that mentioned a conversation by a cart of oysters 4 years ago, where a name had been said with laughter, and then with fear. He did not smile. He parted with the ledger as a man parts with a sweetmeat, when a boy begs at his table, and then remembers the boy will take it and choke. Varys listened to his little birds and heard that a gold cloak had muttered something in a wine shop about a list, and had been told by his captain to shut his mouth unless he wanted it shut for him. Varys sent the man a loaf of bread and a small jar of salt. He believed in instructive gifts. Loras took a turn on the practice yard with a blunted blade and cut precisely where his master told him to. Sweat ran down his spine in 3 lines and left a dark letter on his tunic. Renly watched him and spoke to the master-at-arms about the king's guards drills, and asked who made up their numbers and whether they preferred wine before or after supper. He asked what a city did when you wanted it to stay still, and found, again, that such a creature cannot be asked. It must be lulled or frightened. Either way, you were dealing with an animal. Gendry began work at the Royal Forge and found that the iron there was no different than the iron anywhere else, that men's tongues were exactly the same, that there were knives in looks sharper than any he had made. He learned which men had arrived with him, which before, which would be there long after he had gone. He slept in a narrow bed under a roof that sang when wind hit it, and dreamed of a field that was not yet planted, and of footsteps in it that were his and not his. He did not think of kings. When men said the word near him, he let it pass as one lets pass a cart one does not intend to load. Cersei went to the sept and knelt, and spoke the prayers she had been taught with a mouth that knew how to form them even when the heart behind felt only contempt. She lit a candle at the mother, and none at the crone. When a spider ran along the stone near her knee, she did not hiss. She watched it with interest until it found a crack and slid into it and became invisible. She rose without making a show, and told no one she had done it. In her room she broke Tywin's seal and read his letter, and felt relief like clear water run through her. He did not say not to be afraid. He said to be ready. The difference steadied her hand. On the 3rd morning after the child had been paraded through the hall, and courtiers had exhausted themselves with clever mercy, a fishmonger's wife in Flea Bottom told a neighbor that the queen's people were asking questions about dark-haired babes born in a certain month. The neighbor told a cloth vendor, and added that she had heard of a boy pressed too hard with questions that had a knife at the end of them. By dusk men told their wives to keep shutters closed, and the women told the men to keep their mouths closed, and the children learned a new game that involved guessing whose father was a king, and then running very fast. Renly received a note without seal that smelled faintly of something sweet. It told him in a hand too tidy to be careless that a gold cloak had visited a midwife with questions, and that the midwife had laughed into her apron for an hour after had gone. He sent Loras nowhere at all, and went himself with two men remarkable only for their patience. He found the midwife sitting upon a stool with her feet in a basin, and her hands empty of anything but age. She had eyes the color of puddle water, and a mouth that had delivered more truth than a sept. She told him what he already knew and added one thing: the gold cloak had worn new boots. "Stannis," Loras said aloud that evening when Renly told him without the telling. "Your brother's coin." "No," Renly said. He lay upon his back and watched the play of candlelight on the ceiling's plaster vines. "Not unless he has lost his judgment. Boots that new squeak. Stannis does not squeak." Then someone wears his creed like a cloak," Loras said. "Either way, the babe bleeds." Renly's hands were still on his stomach. He felt the measure of his breath travel under them. "If someone is using my brother's righteousness to hide a knife," he said slowly, "we must find a way to take the knife and leave him the righteousness." "A delicate operation," Loras said. "You will want a surgeon." "I have one," Renly said. "He wears silk and says nothing without meaning three things by it." "Varys," Loras said, and tried to laugh and found he did not want to. In the counting room, Stannis scratched a line through an entry that had bought a city official new laces, and reassigned it to a column where it would buy grain for men who would lift sacks until they were old. He did not know about the gold cloak with new boots. He had not ordered any such thing. When Davos told him that someone had asked the midwives questions that bore his voice, he said only, after a very long moment, "Find me the man." "And if I cannot?" Davos asked. "Then find me the captain who told him," Stannis said. "And if he cannot?" Davos asked. Stannis looked up. "Then I will use the city watch as a man uses a dull knife," he said, "and see if there is a sharper one to be found." Later, when the keep slept as much as it ever did, Renly went to Varys and spoke on a balcony where the eunuch's soft shoes did not sound, and where the moon made the city look as if all its sharp edges had been filed down by a giant's patient hand. "Someone wears Stannis' face," Renly said. "Many do," Varys said. "It is a popular mask among those who like to believe they are strong because they are stern." "Find me the man," Renly said. "I may," Varys said. "But if I do, what will you do with him?" Renly thought of Margaery's pearls and of Bara's fingers and of Joffrey's pale, thin mouth and of Robert's eyes when he had lifted the helm. "Take away his boots," he said, "and then make him run." On the fourth day, a raven from Old Town arrived with words that could be read to counsel patience, and could be read to counsel severance, and could be read to counsel prayer. Robert read them 3 times and then put them down and said, "I will hunt doe," Cersei said, with such mildness that a man who did not know the sea might take it for a calm that would last. "Take Ser Barristan with you." "I will take men who can keep my cup full," Robert said. "If Ser Barristan comes, I will be too ashamed to drink." "You have never been ashamed," she said. "Not when you were listening," he said, and left her to sundown and the small polished cruelties with which she arranged her reflections. In the yard, as the hunting party assembled, there was the smell of horse and leather, and that soft dust that rises from dry ground when hooves paw it. Renly had an adept's eye for such theater. He saw men who rode for sport, and men who rode for the chance to whisper in the king's moving ear, and men who rode to be seen, and men who rode because men of their rank were expected to. He saw too that 2 Lannister men had brought hounds more show than smell, and that Stannis had not come at all. Robert laughed and took his spear from a groom and swung up into the saddle with a grunt that did not negate the athleticism of the act. "Look at me," he said, half mocking, half wistful. "Still a stag." "Do not run yourself to ground," Renly said, and Robert laughed out fully at that and dug in his heels. When they had gone and the keep had settled to a different rhythm, Davos found the man with the new boots. He found him not because he was the best at such things, though he was very good, but because a life spent among men who told lies that could not float had taught him the look of a man who feared drowning. He tugged the man into a shadow and let him see his own face reflected back at him. The scar, the docked fingers, the gaze that had watched men make decisions and live to go back upon them. The gold cloak spoke too quickly and too loudly and offered names like dice. "Stop," Davos said, and the gentleness of it made the man do so. "Whose order?" "I thought," the man said. "We thought. We heard." "Whose order?" Davos said again. And this time it was not in him to be kind, because there were children going to sleep under shutters tonight with their mothers holding breath like a cup of water they had not been permitted to drink. "Speak a simple name." The man swallowed. "Ser Janos," he said at last, and the syllables picked up mud as they ran through his mouth. Davos nodded once. "Go home," he said. "Take off your boots. Walk a while barefoot. Remember what it feels like. Memkan." He took the name to Stannis, and Stannis took himself to the watch, and Janos Slint discovered that a master of coin can count without a Bacchus, and cut without steel, and that sometimes an order is a rope that pulls you down a well, rather than a pulley that lifts a bucket out. The watch muttered. The city breathed through its teeth. Varys wrote a note to Renly that said only, "The knife you asked for is not sharp." Petyr sent a gift of shoes to a captain who had too many pairs already. Cersei watched the weathercock on Maker's holdfast and smiled, because it pointed a different way every hour and men took it for a sign, even though it had been loosened on its post for years. The wind shifted again. In the royal forest a boar went to ground and broke a bush to make his shield. The king's laughter battered off trees and the dogs went mad with it. Robert threw his spear and missed by a whisper, and swore like a man who had realized a thing late and then refused to hear it. He drank, not enough to shame but enough to soften, and the boar came around in a circle that would have looked like fate if a man had been in the mood to take that shape from chance. Sir Barristan was not there to be ashamed of him. Sir Lancel was there with a skin of wine and a face that wanted to apologize for its existence. Robert took the skin and drank, and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and swung back into the saddle like an old oath made flesh. In the city, Gendry drew a bar and set it to the anvil, and made it into a thing that would fit another thing, and thought of nothing in particular. Renly stood before a map, and moved small smooth men from one place to another, then moved them back, then moved them elsewhere. Stannis balanced a column against a column, and found that there was a way to make the number at the bottom behave. Loras ran a whetstone along a blade, and made of the sound a kind of prayer. The realm was poised. It did not know it. Poised things never do. When the hunting party returned, it returned not as a shouting cloud, but as a weary line. Robert's face had a sheen to it like oil that had gotten into the grain of wood. His leg bled. He pretended it did not, until he could not. Men who had been boys with him looked at him and did not know what to say, and so spoke too much or not at all. Lancel's mouth trembled. The dogs were quiet. The sky was the color of iron shavings. Renly heard before he saw. He moved through the keep as if he had been made for corridors and rooms, and the way men make way for a man who has just learned the thing they are about to tell him. Stannis arrived by a different way, the straight way you take when you have spent your life learning to prefer it. Cersei came as if she had been summoned by a word she would not permit the heir to utter without permission. Varys was there already because he usually was. Petyr arrived with an appropriate degree of breathlessness. Pycelle reeked of a treacle he had once told a king would make a man sleep sweetly. "Boar," someone said. "Boar," someone else said. Robert lay on the bed in a shift too fine for him, and grinned between his teeth like a man who has just accepted a bet he knows he should not have taken. Blood made a dark island on the white. "Don't look like that," he said to no one and everyone, catching at Renly's sleeve with a hand that had choked laughter out of men, and been someone's idea of mercy more times than it should. "You should see the boar." "We will," Renly said, and the firmness of it was a comfort to him. "It gored me," Robert said with fierce glee, as if the boar had done a thing he could admire. "And I gored it." "Huh." He winced, and then an old ghost passed across his face and left him older. "Don't bring me another damned cup, boy," he said to Lancel, who had not moved. "I have enough." "Your Grace," Stannis said, and the iron in his voice made silence. "Ah," Robert said, You've come to count the breaths I've got left, and make certain they go into the right column." He let his head rest back. The skin of his face had taken that loathsome tallow yellow a certain kind of wound brings. "Good. You'll keep them from stealing the bed while I'm in it." "Then thou shall." "We will bring a maester," Renly said. "Bring 10, Robert said. "Bring the high septon if you like." I had boar. I had wine. The 7 had a joke to play. They got their laugh. He reached for Renly again and drew him closer until the chain pressed between them, cold. "Right," he said. "I'll put it in your hand. You always liked words." It took a moment to realize what he meant. Then Renly's fingers were on the small table to the bedside, and an inkhorn was set, and a sheet was spread. Robert's breath was loud as forge bellows in the room. "Now," he said roughly. "Now, while it is still my voice." He began, and the words came harsh but clear. He named what any king names in such a circumstance: a realm too heavy to leave at hazard. The boy he had called his heir until a moment ago, when some other weight had finally come down upon him. The work of days and the slow mundanities that keep kingdoms from becoming mere stories, told by dancing bears to impress drunks. He did not say Joffrey. He said instead my true-born son, as the High Septon would have preferred. Renly wrote. He felt the ink take the words and fix them whether he wished or not. He felt Stannis' eyes upon the page, and Cersei's eyes upon the hand that moved, and Varys' eyes upon the whole of them, and Pedder's eyes upon the places where men might fall in the days to come. He wrote the last word. He sanded the ink. He lifted the page and Robert pressed his hand to it, and left there the dirty impress of a man who had done all the labor he meant ever to do. "Now," Robert said, and shut his eyes for a moment as if to sleep. He opened them after a moment, because he was not done. "You tell me, boy," he said to Renly. "If I set her aside, do you keep the realm quiet?" "I keep what I can," Renly said. The truth came easy. Lies take breath he could not spare. "You are a pretty one," Robert whispered, and smiled in a way that remembered a hill and a hammer and a hammer and a dead prince and a girl with hair black as night under a blue canopy. "Stannis," he said, and found his brother. "If you do it with your damned face. Don't borrow mine. I never wore it well." He shut his eyes again. "Should have married Lyanna," he said. What he had said before. What men would say after. And the words went into the room like blackbirds and settled where they would. Outside, night fell. The city lit its eyes like a beast and watched the men in the palace move. The boar hung in the yard, and its smell went out into the air like an argument. Lancel sat alone and held his own hand and found it did not fit right. Stannis stood with Davos and said nothing for a long time, and then said, "The law," as if it were a prayer. Renly took the rolled parchment and did not let it go, even when he slept. The next day, the bells of the great sept of Baelor tolled with a measured grief that had been hired 100 years ago, and sounded the same for all kings unless instructed otherwise. Men wept who had not loved Robert, and men laughed who had, because sometimes the body does not know what it is supposed to feel, and so chooses what it can. Cersei mourned with the exact degree of form demanded by her station, and wore a gown that made her look like a slender candle in a dark room, and took no heat from it. Joffrey wore solemnity like a new cloak cut too long in the sleeves. Tommen cried, and that cried was true. Myrcella stood like a flower just before a storm. The Kingsguard stood white and very still. When the council gathered again, the room had lost a smell and gained another. It had lost sweat and wine and the peculiar spice of Robert's humor. It had gained ink and new fear, and the damp wool reek of men who had not slept. Renly set the parchment upon the table without flourish. "The king's will," he said. Cersei's hand lay soft upon the wood. She did not reach for the parchment. "The king was unwell," she said, as if she spoke of weather. "The king was clear," Stannis said. "The king was in wine," she said. "The king was Robert," Pettier murmured, and achieved, with 4 words, a dozen plausible meanings. Pycelle coughed and made a show of peering as if the letters might hop like fleas if he did not trap them with his eyes. Varys watched, and no man could say whether he was watching the parchment or the people watching it. Outside the open window, The sound of the city rose like steam. Renly did not look at anyone. He broke the seal he had put there with his own ring. He read, his voice even, his eyes on the words, and as he did so, the realm crossed a line drawn in ink. When he had done, there was a silence that made the candle wicks snap sound like thunder. Cersei's mouth curved only at one corner. Jaime's eyes narrowed as if at a target a little too far to be certain of, and too near to safely ignore. Stannis' breath went out in a long line through a nose that had been broken once, years ago by a boy who would be king. Varys smoothed the fold of silk with 2 fingers and looked down. Petyr smiled as if a child had just mispronounced a word in an endearing way. "I declare," Cersei said, "that my son is the king. I shall not have the realm governed by my husband's drink or by the jealousies of brothers who never forgave me for a marriage they did not like." "Your son is," Stannis began, and Renly lifted a hand that stopped him, and for a moment Stannis looked as if he would ignore it, and then did not. "My lords," Renly said. And he was beautiful then in a way that had nothing to do with the things men usually mean by that word. "This is not a feast. This is not a hunt. There are not 4 sides to this table at which we may seat ourselves according to the tale we wish to tell. There are 2. He lifted the parchment slightly. "The king named a regent. The king named a succession. The High Septon's letter arrives before noon with words that can be read a certain way. We must choose which way to read them. We must choose to be one thing, not 3. Cersei's eyes went to the parchment with a cold animal's intensity. "Choose," she said. "We will," Renly said softly. He felt Loras at his back, though Loras was not in the room. He felt Stannis' rough old honesty like a wall to his right, and Varys' soft deceit like a river to his left, and Cersei's blade in front of him, and a storm at his back, named Robert, that would never again blow in from any horizon, to tear down the tents men had put up in the night. He laid his palm upon the parchment, as one might lay it on a child's head. "But we will choose after we have eaten, and after we have counted the chairs in this room, and after we have ensured that men who do not belong at this table do not have knives beneath it. You do like to delay." Cersei said, but her mouth was tight around the words as a miser's around coin. "Sometimes delay is the only mercy kingdoms get," Renly said without smiling. He raised his eyes and met Stannis. His brother's expression was not gratitude. It was something like endurance, like a man braced in a doorway while a gale argued with his bones. It would do. Outside the day went on with its errands. Men bought bread. Women bargained down a cloth by 2 coppers, and then lost them in the street to a pickpocket, who would use them to buy oil for a lamp that would burn too fast. A boy in the royal forge beat iron into a tool that would build something or break it, according to the hands that took it up. In the street of silk, a babe slept with her thumb in her mouth. In Old Town, a bell tolled 6, and a student who would later be a maester, and then not a maester, copied a sentence that said laws must be read. In the north, under a weirwood that had seen kings whose names were forgotten, and would see more yet, a man with a quiet face told his sons to be careful. Far to the east, a red woman dreamed a dream, in which a stag and a rose and a lion all burned together, and the smoke made the shape of a crown. She woke without fear. Faith is a kind of coin. When you spend it, you keep it. Night approached. The red keep turned its face toward it as a sunflower follows the sun. Torches were lit. Men prepared to do brave things and unbrave things. Renly stood alone for a moment in the high place where the wind came honest, and the city spread itself beneath him, like the pelt of an animal hung for curing, and he said aloud the thing he had decided, to see if it sounded any truer when the air itself heard it. "We will make a way," he said. "We will not miss."